Have you ever had someone you loved more than anyone, someone who you thought would always have your back, betray you without a second thought? What would you do if that person chose to believe the lies of their closest friend over you? The person you swore to protect, to care for, the one you thought you'd share your life with, now looking at you like you're a stranger. No explanation, no questions, just cold silence. Well, that's what happened to me, and it wasn't just a betrayal. It was the destruction of everything I thought I knew. The slow, painful unraveling of my marriage. My wife, Livia, believed her toxic best friend's lies over me, and when the truth finally came to light, there was nothing left to salvage. No happy ending, just the wreckage of a life I thought we'd built together. My name is Gideon, and this is my story. I'll never forget the first time I met Livia's best friend, Clara. She was everything I wasn't. Confident, outspoken, and the kind of person who could turn a room full of strangers into her personal audience. Livia and Clara had been inseparable since their teenage years, but there was something about Clara that rubbed me the wrong way. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. She was always charming, always smiling, but there was this undertone, something under the surface that felt... I never said anything to Livia. I didn't want to make waves. I figured I was just being paranoid, you know? Sometimes I'd catch Clara looking at me a little too long, almost as if she was waiting for me to do something, some small mistake. But Livia would always brush it off. Oh, Gideon, Clara's just like that. She's always had a way of reading people. Don't take it personally. But then, things started to change. It wasn't just Clara's stares or the little snide remarks that got under my skin. Livia started changing too. At first, I thought it was just the stress of work, the long hours. But slowly I began to notice her pulling away from me. Her smiles grew less frequent, her touch more distant, and the conversations that used to be endless, filled with laughter and plans, started to feel forced, like we were both just going through the motions. I tried to talk to her about it, but every time I did, she would shut down. She'd say things like, "I'm just tired, Gideon," or "It's nothing really, I just need space." But I knew something was wrong. The woman I had married, the woman I had given everything to, was no longer the same. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning. This was when Clara's influence started to grow. I didn't know what she was telling Livia, but every day, Livia seemed to drift further away from me and closer to Clara. And as the distance between Livia and me grew, the more I tried to fill that void. I kept myself busy with work, with anything to keep my mind off the sinking feeling in my chest. But it didn't matter. Something was happening behind the scenes, something I couldn't see, but I could feel. One evening, I came home to find Livia sitting in the living room, her eyes red, as though she had been crying. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I rushed to her side. "What happened? What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. Livia looked at me, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. Then she spoke, her voice cold, distant. "I think we need to talk." I tried to stay calm. I tried to steady myself, but I was panicking. We sat down on the couch, and she looked at me again, this time without any warmth, without any of the love that had once radiated from her. She spoke quietly, but her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I've been talking to Clara, Gideon, and she's been telling me things about you." I felt my heart stop, my breath caught in my throat. "Things?" I repeated, not understanding. "What things?" Livia didn't answer at first. She just looked at me, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. "Things I never wanted to believe, but I think she's right." I was stunned. My mind raced. "Clara, What could Clara possibly say about me? I had always been respectful, patient, and loving toward Livia. What had she been telling her? But Livia wouldn't tell me. She just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Gideon," she whispered. "I just don't know what to believe anymore." In that moment, I knew. I knew that Clara had been planting seeds of doubt in Livia's mind, but it was too late. Livia had already chosen her side, the one I loved, the one I trusted. Be inspired by hatred. You know how it is. In that moment, I knew that Clara had been planting seeds of doubt in Livia's mind, and it wasn't good enough. The precise moment, I knew what would happen. Livia would come crash down into my spot. Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. Livia became more and more distant, refusing to listen to my explanations, my pleas. Every time I tried to confront Clara, to ask her what she had been saying, she would laugh it off, dismiss me like I was nothing. The more I tried to fight for my marriage, the more I found myself slipping into despair. And then one day, I caught Clara and Livia together, talking behind my back, whispering in hushed tones. The betrayal was too much to bear. I never expected to find what I did that night. My own wife, the one person I thought would stand by me, had completely turned against me. But what hurt the most wasn't the lies Clara had told. No, what hurt the most was the realization that Livia didn't even care to find out the truth. She had already made her decision. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a small fight that could be worked through. No, this was the slow, deliberate unraveling of everything I had built with Livia. The destruction of a love I thought was unbreakable. And the worst part was that there was nothing I could do to stop it. Before everything fell apart, I thought I had it all. A beautiful wife, a peaceful home, a love I thought was unshakable. My name is Gideon, and if you'd asked me a year ago if I'd ever be standing here telling you this story, I would have laughed in disbelief. But now, here I am, broken, betrayed, and left wondering how it all went wrong. It was a year ago, before Clara, before the lies, before the cold silence from the woman I loved. I remember those days like they were yesterday. Peaceful mornings, warm evenings spent together, laughter echoing through the house. Livia and I, we were happy. I could say with conviction that I had found my soulmate. Our relationship had always been effortless. We connected on a level I never thought possible, but I never could have anticipated the storm brewing just under the surface. Livia had always been close with her best friend Clara, and I mean close. They'd been through everything together, thick and thin. They were each other's constant support, the type of friendship that was unbreakable in their eyes. From the moment we got married, I knew Clara would always be in the picture, and for the longest time, I didn't mind. She was part of Livia's life. What could possibly go wrong? But if I'm being honest with you, I had a strange feeling about Clara from the start. Something in the way she spoke to me, always just a little too familiar, a little too bold. But I ignored it. I convinced myself it was nothing. I didn't want to rock the boat. She was Livia's best friend, after all. I remember the first time Clara came over to our house after we got married. It was just a casual dinner, nothing out of the ordinary. I'd cooked, as I always did on Fridays. The three of us sat around the table, chatting about old memories, life updates, and future plans. But the moment that stuck with me wasn't the warm conversation. No, it was the subtle way Clara kept looking at me. The way she raised an eyebrow every time I laughed at something she said. I could feel her eyes studying me like I was an open book. At first, I brushed it off. She was just a quirky person, right? But as the months went by, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a tension I could never ignore. Then there were the comments, the ones that seemed harmless on the surface, but always made me uneasy. Clara would make little jokes about Livia and me, testing our boundaries, pushing the envelope. At first it didn't bother me, but slowly the comments became more frequent, more pointed. You know, Livia, you really don't need to check in with him all the time, she'd say. Or Gideon's a lucky guy, but don't let him get too comfortable. It was always wrapped in humor, but I started to feel the undercurrent of something dark. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was just overthinking. But every time Clara opened her mouth, I felt a slight shift in the air. It was like she was planting seeds, one by one, and I had no idea what kind of garden was about to bloom. Then came the night that changed everything. I'll never forget it. We'd had a small gathering at the house. Just a few friends, some drinks, some music. Livia and Clara were laughing in the kitchen while I talked with a few friends in the living room. It was a relaxed evening, nothing extraordinary. But something happened that night. Something I couldn't have predicted in my wildest dreams. It was almost midnight when Clara left early, claiming she had a work emergency that she needed to take care of. She didn't even say goodbye to me. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think much of it. Later that night, Livia and I sat on the couch, the buzz of the party still lingering in the air, and that's when she dropped the bomb. I think she told me that Clara had been concerned about us. Livia didn't go into much detail, but the look on her face told me everything. I didn't know it then, but Clara had already begun planting her lies. And when Livia told me about Clara's concerns, that's when I felt the first crack in the foundation of our marriage. You see, Clara had told Livia that I wasn't being fully transparent with her. She hinted at things I'd supposedly said or done that never happened. She spoke about me like I was a stranger, like I was someone untrustworthy. And the worst part, Livia believed her. Just like that. In an instant, I went from the loving husband, the man she married, to someone she was suspicious of. From that moment on, I could see the change in Livia. The tension, the questions, the doubt that never existed before. I tried to explain, tried to tell her there had to be a misunderstanding. But every time I opened my mouth, she would shut me down. Her trust in me started to wane, and it seemed like Clara was always there, always just out of sight, but somehow influencing everything. I tried to fight it. I tried to hold on to what we had. But slowly, day by day, Livia pulled away. Our conversations became arguments. Our laughter became silence. And through it all, Clara was there, feeding the fire. I never imagined it would get this bad, that it would escalate to this point. But somewhere along the way, I lost Livia, and I didn't even see it happening. I should have known then that once the seed of doubt had been planted, it was only a matter of time before everything we'd built together would come crashing down. But what really crushed me, what really broke me, was that I hadn't seen Clara for what she truly was, a poisonous influence, hiding behind the veil of friendship, carefully orchestrating a disaster that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. And the worst part, Livia, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, she chose Clara's side. She chose the lies. I don't know how it happened, but it did. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for my very identity. The person I thought I knew, the person I trusted, wasn't the woman standing in front of me anymore. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, that I couldn't even recognize Livia. And when the truth came out, when I finally pieced everything together, it was already too late. But that's the thing with betrayal, isn't it? By the time you realize you've been betrayed, The damage is already done, and all that's left is the aftermath. This is where my story truly begins. At first, it wasn't obvious. The signs were subtle, like cracks in a windshield that you don't notice until it's too late. The tension started with small things, insignificant, seemingly harmless things. But over time, those small cracks grew deeper until they shattered everything we built together. It was just a whisper at first. Little things that Clara would say to Livia when I wasn't around. Sometimes it was a casual remark like, "Are you sure Gideon's being completely honest with you?" Other times it was more pointed. Maybe he's been working late because he's seeing someone else. It was easy to dismiss at first. After all, Clara was just concerned about her best friend, right? But soon I started noticing how these concerns were creeping into the conversations Livia and I would have at night. At first I thought it was just a phase. I assumed that Livia might be stressed out, or maybe it was the usual worries any couple faces. But I began to feel a shift in the air between us. I wasn't just what Clara said though, it was how she said it. There was the way she spoke to Livia, always planting doubts, always suggesting that maybe I wasn't as trustworthy as I seemed. She'd tell Livia that she deserved more, that maybe I was taking her for granted. But the worst part was how Livia started repeating these things, parroting Clara's words like they were her own. I could see the change in her. The woman who used to smile at me from across the room with unconditional trust, she was pulling away, bit by bit, like someone slowly drowning without even realizing it. I remember one particular night when Livia came home late from dinner with Clara. She was quiet, distant. At first I thought she was just tired from the evening, but as I asked her how it went, I noticed something was off. She barely looked at me. She didn't want to talk about it. When I pushed, she snapped, "Why are you being so defensive? Do you have something to hide?" I was taken aback. The question seemed to come out of nowhere, and it was nothing like the woman I married, but I tried to remain calm. I told her, "Of course not. I'm just asking because you seem upset." But she didn't hear me. The conversation quickly escalated into a full-blown argument. And the worst part wasn't what she said to me. It was how she said it. The words she used felt like they weren't hers. It was almost as though Clara had written the script, and Livia was simply reading from it. "You're always so distant lately. Maybe you're not as committed as you say you are. Maybe you don't love me the way you once did." I tried to explain. I really did. I told her, "I've been busy at work. I've been trying to keep us afloat. You know that. I love you more than anything. Don't listen to Clara." But every time I said Clara's name, it was like I'd said a forbidden word. Her face hardened and she shut down even more. "Don't bring Clara into this," she'd say. "She's my best friend. She only wants what's best for me." That night, I knew something was seriously wrong. The cracks had been there before, but now they were obvious. They were too wide to ignore. Livia wasn't listening to me anymore. She was listening to Clara. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our home grew colder. There were no more cozy dinners or late-night talks. Instead, there was silence, tension, arguments that felt like they were being scripted by someone who wasn't even in the room. I'd walk into the kitchen to find Livia staring at the counter, lost in thought, her expression distant. And then, as if she was just waiting for the right moment, she'd drop another bombshell. "I think Clara might be right," she'd say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you've been lying to me. Maybe you've been keeping secrets." Each time she said it, it felt like a slap to the face, but I couldn't reach her anymore. The walls between us were getting higher, and no matter how much I tried to tear them down, the more Livia pulled away. I began to see the manipulation clearly now. Clara wasn't just planting doubts, she was building a fortress around my wife's mind. And every lie, every twisted suggestion was a brick in that wall. The worst part wasn't just that Livia was believing Clara's lies, it was that she started acting on them. She'd go through my phone, accusing me of deleting messages, questioning every little detail of my day. "Why didn't you tell me you spoke to James at lunch?" she'd ask, her voice laced with suspicion. Or, "Why didn't you tell me you ran into Clara at the store yesterday? Was there something you were hiding?" I felt like I was being suffocated, like every breath I took was scrutinized. I couldn't win. No matter how many times I reassured her, how many times I tried to show her that I was still the man she married, Livia couldn't shake the image that Clara had planted in her head. And with every passing day, that image grew more and more vivid, until I didn't recognize the woman standing before me. One night, after another argument, this one about a business trip I had to take, Livia said something that broke me. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Maybe it's time we take a break." And in that moment, I felt the weight of everything crashing down. She didn't trust me. She didn't love me the way she used to. And it was all because of Clara. But here's the thing, they say the truth always comes out in the end, right? Well, I didn't know it at the time, but that's exactly what was going to happen. The truth. The ugly, painful truth. And when it finally came to light, there was nothing I could do to undo what had already been done. I wish I could say that everything turned around after that. I wish I could say that I found a way to fix everything, to repair the trust that had been broken. But the truth is, sometimes the damage is irreversible. And when the truth finally did come out, when the lies were exposed for what they truly were, the damage had already been done. The question wasn't whether or not I could fix things. It was whether or not I wanted to fix a marriage that had already been broken by betrayal. Then it happened. The moment I dreaded, the moment I had feared was coming but never wanted to face. I'll never forget that night. It started like any other, or so I thought. I came home late from work, tired but ready to put the day behind me and find some peace at home. When I walked through the door, I expected the usual routine. Livia on the couch, maybe watching TV or flipping through her phone. A quiet evening after a long week. But instead, the house was eerily silent. Too silent. I called out for her, but no answer. My heart started to race as I made my way through the house, searching for her. And then I found her. She was in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands. I could see her shoulders shaking. At first I thought it was just exhaustion, but maybe she had been crying about something else, something unrelated to me. But when she looked up at me, her eyes were raw, swollen, red-rimmed. Her gaze was different, cold, a stranger's gaze. "Livia, what's going on? What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling, trying to stay calm. I didn't know why, but I already felt the air between us, thickening with an unbearable weight. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she said the words that shattered everything. "I can't trust you anymore, Gideon." I froze. The words were a slap, a punch to the gut, something I couldn't even comprehend. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice breaking as I stepped closer, desperate for some explanation. "Why would you say that? I've never lied to you. You know that. What's going on?" But she didn't answer me. Instead, she just stared at the floor, her hands wringing together nervously. "Clara," she said finally, her voice low and strained. She'd been telling me things about you, things that I didn't want to believe. But now I don't know. Maybe she was right. Maybe you've been hiding something from me. Maybe all this time you've been lying about everything. Her words hit me like a wave crashing against a fragile dam, breaking it open, flooding me with confusion, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. How could she believe this? After everything we'd been through, how could she just like that, turn her back on me? All because of a few words from Clara. What exactly is she saying, Livia? What lies has she been feeding you? I demanded, stepping forward. But even as I said it, I could feel the walls between us, high and unyielding, built brick by her best friend's manipulations. Livia took a deep breath, then spoke, each word like a dagger, driving deeper into my chest. She told me you were cheating on me. She said you were distant because you were seeing someone else. She said you've been lying about where you've been, about what you've been doing. I staggered back, my heart pounding in my chest. What? Livia, that's not true. None of it is true. How could you even believe that? I felt desperation rising in my throat. I wanted to shake her, to make her see reason, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had already made up her mind. She had already chosen to believe Clara's lies over me. I wanted to believe you, Gideon, Livia said softly, the words almost breaking me. I really did. But the more I heard it from Clara, the more I started to see it, to see the signs. I just don't know if I can trust you anymore. Those words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating everything around us. Trust. It had been the foundation of our relationship. It had been the one thing we had promised each other we would never break. But now, in this moment, it felt as though that trust had been destroyed beyond repair. The walls between us were now complete, the silence between us deafening. I tried to explain, to plead with her, but she wouldn't hear me. I need time, Gideon, she said, standing up and moving toward the door. I need to think. I need to figure out what's real and what isn't. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left standing there, alone in the emptiness of her home, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. It felt like I had just lost her. The woman I loved more than anything in the world, the woman I had spent years building a life with, was now slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Nothing but the suffocating, gnawing feeling of betrayal. Oh, I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment, every encounter I had ever had with Livia. Was there something I missed? Some sign that I had overlooked? Could I have done something differently? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the truth didn't matter anymore. The lies had already taken root in her mind, and no matter how much I tried to explain, no matter how many times I said that Clara was manipulating her, it didn't make a difference. Livia had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. The betrayal was deeper than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the fact that Livia, my wife, the woman who had stood by my side for years, had chosen to believe them. She had let Clara poison her thoughts, and in doing so, she had destroyed everything we had built together. I don't know how long I lay there in that cold, empty bed, but eventually the tears came. They weren't tears of anger or even sadness. They were tears of defeat, of knowing that everything I thought was real, everything I believed in was now shattered. I had lost her, and I didn't know if I could ever get her back. Days passed, and the distance between us only grew. Livia barely spoke to me, and when she did, her voice was distant, cold. I could see her retreating into herself, clinging to Clara's assurances that I wasn't who I said I was. And the more I tried to bridge the gap between us, the more she shut me out. One afternoon, I came home to find that she had packed a bag. "I'm gonna stay with Clara for a while," she said, her voice hollow. "I need to figure things out." And with those words, the final thread between us snapped, She was gone, and I was left alone in a house that once held the laughter and love of two people who had promised to stand by each other through anything. But now, it was just silence, cold, empty silence. I had been betrayed by the one person I trusted most, and now there was no going back. I tried everything: counseling, heart-to-heart talks, even apologizing for things I didn't even do. But nothing worked. Every time I thought we were making progress, Clara's words would seep back in, like poison, slowly working its way through Livia's veins. The more I tried to fix things, the further she seemed to drift away. I remember the first therapy session we had after the argument. I thought it would be a breakthrough. I thought if we just sat down with someone impartial, maybe Livia would see the truth. But when we walked into that office, the coldness in her eyes was unmistakable. She was still so guarded, so distant. Our therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Monica, tried to ease us into the conversation. She asked us both about our feelings. Livia was quiet at first, but when she spoke, the words were sharp. "I can't trust him," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "I don't know if I ever will again. He's been lying to me, hiding things, and I can't keep living like that." I was stunned. "Livia, I haven't been lying to you," I pleaded. "What is it that you think I've done? Please, just tell me." But she wouldn't. She just sat there, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the floor. Clara's lies had planted a seed in her mind, and no matter what I said, it couldn't be uprooted. "We're not going to move forward if you don't believe in me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I love you. I never did anything to hurt you, Livia. I don't know what Clara's been telling you, but I swear to you, none of it is true." But it was like I was speaking to a wall. Livia didn't respond, and the silence in the room felt suffocating. It was as though we were strangers, as though the woman I had loved for years was slipping away from me, and I couldn't reach her. After the session, nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. Livia would come home late, often staying out for hours, disappearing with Clara, and barely acknowledging me when she came back. And each time I asked her what was going on, what was wrong, she would either snap at me or stay silent, retreating further into herself. Livia and Alice would start showing up totally unannounced and begin to murder each other several times. There were moments when I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a moment when I could have sworn she was considering what I was saying, but it would vanish in an instant, replaced by the cold, unwavering loyalty to Clara. I tried everything I could think of to make things right. I wrote her letters, pouring my heart into words, explaining how much she meant to me, how much I wanted to fight for us. I even planned a weekend getaway, just the two of us, to try and reconnect, to remind her of the love we had shared. But it was all in vain. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Gideon," Livia said one night, after we had barely spoken all evening. She was sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at her phone, her face a mask of indifference. "I've been thinking a lot, and I'm just not sure I can trust you." "You're not even giving me a chance," I said, my frustration boiling over. "I'm telling you the truth. This isn't me. I never did anything to betray you." But again, she wasn't listening. Every word I spoke felt like it fell on deaf ears. The distance between us had become a chasm, so wide, so deep, that I wasn't sure how we could ever cross it. I remember the night that everything seemed to reach its breaking point. It had been weeks since we'd had any kind of real conversation. Livia was still staying with Clara more often than not, and I felt like I was living alone in my own home. I came home that night, tired and dejected, expecting more silence, more distance. But this time, when I walked in, Livia was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in front of her. She looked at me with a coldness I hadn't seen before. "I've made up my mind," she said, her voice steady but emotionless. "I'm going to stay with Clara permanently. I can't keep doing this, Gideon. I don't feel safe with you anymore." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What are you saying?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "You're leaving me and leave the town." "I don't know what's real anymore," she said, shaking her head. "I don't know who to trust, and I'm not going to keep pretending that everything's fine when I know it's not. I need space. I need time to think." The weight of those words was suffocating. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a decision, a final one, made with the full backing of Clara's influence. It was as if she had already written me off, and no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried to prove my innocence, I had already lost. But the thing that hurt the most wasn't just that Livia was leaving. It was that I had no idea what more I could do. I had given everything. I had tried to save us, but nothing was working. Clara's words had poisoned our marriage, and now, even if I could show Livia the truth, would she even believe me anymore? The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and endless questions. I kept thinking about everything I had done, everything I had said, every opportunity I'd missed. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix it. I couldn't undo the damage that had been done. And in the back of my mind, there was one question I couldn't shake. Was it too late? Was there anything left to save, or had Clara's lies completely destroyed everything we once had? As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something even more disturbing. Livia's connection to Clara seemed to grow even stronger. I thought that maybe after the separation, after some time apart, Livia would come to see the truth. Maybe she would realize that I was the one who had been there for her, that I was the one who had loved her unconditionally. But no. The more she spent time with Clara, the more she became like her. She started to change, her behavior, her tone, even the way she looked at me. It was as if Clara's influence was seeping into her every thought, every action. I had always known Clara was manipulative, but I had never realized the extent of her control over Livia until now. It was like watching someone I loved slip away, becoming a shell of the person they once were. And it hurt. It hurt more than anything I had ever felt. But the worst part was knowing that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I fought, I was losing her, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I didn't expect to find what I found that day, a series of text messages between Clara and one of her friends, messages that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. They were nothing short of devastating. There they were, plain as day, a trail of lies and manipulations that Clara had been planting in Livia's mind all along. But the worst part? She knew it was all a lie, and she didn't care. All she wanted was to break us up. I remember that moment like it was yesterday. I'd been trying to hold it together, trying to piece the shattered fragments of my life into something that resembled normal. But the walls were closing in. Livia was still pulling away, still clinging to Clara's words instead of my truth, and it felt like I was losing her every day. Call. That afternoon I was cleaning out the study, just trying to keep busy, trying to keep my mind off of everything. And then I found it, a folder that Livia had left behind on the desk. It wasn't anything I was looking for, just some old receipts, documents, and things she'd been working on. But as I flipped through it, something caught my eye. It was a phone that didn't belong to her. I know it sounds crazy, but in that moment, I felt compelled to check it. I wasn't proud of it, but there was something in me that had reached a breaking point. I needed answers. And when I unlocked the phone, I found exactly what I had been looking for. The first thing I saw were the messages. They weren't long, just a few exchanges between Clara and her best friend, but it was enough. Clara had been talking about me, talking about how I was dangerous, how I was manipulative, and worst of all, she'd been planting doubt about everything I did. There were lines in there that made my blood run cold. You need to get her to see what he's really like. He's been lying to you. Don't let him turn this around on you. This was always about your memories, not your mind. As I read through the messages, a sickening realization settled in. Clara had been weaving a web of lies from the very beginning. Every accusation she made, every complaint Livia had brought up, none of it was based on anything I had actually done. It was all based on Clara's twisted perspective, on her need to destroy our relationship. And somehow, Livia had fallen for it. She had believed every word. But the worst part was what came next. The last few messages were different. In them, Clara outright admitted that she had been playing both of us. I just wanted to make sure you saw the truth, Clara had written. He's nothing but a liar and you deserve better. I'm doing you a favor. Don't let him get into your head. He's not good for you. I felt my hand shake as I read those words. For the first time, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. It wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. All along, I had been the one who was lied to, the one who had been manipulated. Clara had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, and I had been too blind to see it. The shock hit me in waves. I felt a mixture of rage and sorrow wash over me. But there was no time for that. My mind raced. What do I do now? Do I confront Livia with this? Do I tell her everything I've just uncovered, knowing that I could lose her forever? I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't stand by and watch Clara tear apart the woman I loved without fighting back. But at the same time, I knew that this wasn't going to be easy. Livia was so deep in Clara's influence, I didn't know if she would even listen to me. Would she believe me? Or would she think I was just trying to make excuses for my mistakes? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was the moment. The moment where I had to decide if I was going to fight for us, if I was going to expose the truth, or if I was going to walk away. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and called Livia. My heart was pounding in my chest. Livia, we need to talk, I said, my voice more calm than I felt. I have something to show you. There was a long pause on the other end. Then she spoke, her voice distant. I don't think there's anything left to talk about, Gideon. Please, just hear me out, I pleaded. I know you've been listening to Clara, but I swear to you, she's been lying to you. All of this, the accusations, the distrust, it's all been manipulated. I have proof, Livia. Proof? Her voice cracked. What kind of proof? Gideon, I don't know what you expect from me anymore. Just come over, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. Please, let me show you what I've found. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, but after a long silence, she finally agreed. Fine, but I don't know what you think you're going to change, Gideon. I hung up the phone and sat down, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. The hardest part was done. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to come over and see the truth for herself. But deep down, I wasn't sure if it was going to be enough. Could the damage be undone? Could Livia ever see Clara for who she truly was? Or had I already lost her for good? I waited for what felt like an eternity. My mind was spinning, and my heart was pounding. When Livia finally walked through the door, I could tell she was still carrying the weight of Clara's influence. Her eyes were tired, guarded, but there was something different about her, something I hadn't seen in weeks. She looked uncertain. "What is it you wanted to show me?" Livia asked, her voice quiet. I stood up slowly, holding out the phone. "These are the messages from Clara, the ones she's been sending to her friend, the ones that show everything she's been telling you about me is a lie." Livia looked at me, her face unreadable. Then she took the phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the messages. For what felt like forever, there was only silence. The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my breath shallow. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Livia looked up at me. Her eyes were wide and her lips trembled. She did this on purpose?" "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Clara's been lying to you. She's been manipulating you, making you think I was the one who was betraying you, when all along it was her. She never cared about us. Livia, she only wanted to break us apart." Livia stood there for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the phone. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the shock, the confusion. And then, slowly, she set the phone down and looked at me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say. I don't know how I could have been so blind." I took a step toward her, my heart pounding. "Livia, it's okay. I never wanted this to happen. All I wanted was to be with you, to rebuild what we had. Please don't let this tear us apart. We can fix this." For a moment, there was no response. And then, finally, Livia spoke. "I don't know if we can fix it, Gideon, but I'm willing to try. But I feel this migration." When Livia found out the truth, it was like a bomb went off. But it wasn't the explosion I expected. It wasn't just the shock of the betrayal or the vindication I thought I'd feel after exposing Clara's lies. No, it was worse. The truth, in some strange way, didn't set us free. It shattered everything we thought we had left. I'll never forget that night, after she saw the messages, after the weight of Clara's betrayal finally sunk in. Livia collapsed onto the couch, her face pale, her hands shaking. She couldn't even look at me. The silence between us was suffocating. "I don't know who you are anymore, Gideon," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You've been hiding this from me all along. How could you not have told me sooner? How could you have let her manipulate me like this?" I could feel the walls closing in, the hurt in her voice. There was no way to undo it. The truth had come out, yes, but it felt like I was being punished for it. I'd tried to protect her, tried to shield her from the ugliness that Clara had planted. But now it seemed that the very act of holding back the truth had destroyed everything. "Livia, I didn't want to hurt you," I said, my voice trembling. I thought it would be easier if you didn't know. I didn't want to add to the confusion. I just wanted you to be safe from all this." But Livia wasn't hearing it. She pulled away from me, putting distance between us, as if every inch mattered. Safe from what? From your lies, or from the truth? She asked bitterly. The words cut deeper than I'd imagined. I couldn't blame her. I knew I'd made mistakes. I knew I hadn't been perfect. But in that moment, I wanted so badly for her to see that I wasn't the enemy here. Clara had turned everything around. She had made me the villain. And now, I was the one paying the price for it. Livia's eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal. It was as if the realization of what had happened to us, the manipulation, the lies, had completely broken her trust in me, too. She was no longer the woman who had stood by me, who had laughed with me, who had believed in our future together. Now, she was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," Livia said, her voice barely audible as she wiped away a tear. "You kept this from me, Gideon. You let her tear us apart." I knew she was right. I knew we couldn't defend myself, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. The worst part was that even though I had tried to protect her, even though I had kept the truth buried in an attempt to shield her from the chaos, it only made the fallout that much worse. "Livia, I never meant for this to happen," I said, my voice breaking. "I never wanted you to feel like this. Please, don't let her win. I love you. I've always loved you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." But she shook her head, her face twisted with pain. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about Clara. It's about everything. About all the things you didn't tell me. The things I didn't see. How am I supposed to trust you again when everything has been a lie?" And in that moment, I didn't know what to say. There were no words to fix this. There was no magic apology that could undo the damage. We had spent so long building a life together, but now it felt like all of that had been shattered. The foundation of our marriage had cracked, and the pieces felt irreparable. For the next few days, Livia stayed distant. She couldn't even look at me without that same look of confusion and hurt in her eyes. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. The silence between us spoke louder than anything. I knew I had to make a choice. I had to decide if I was going to give up on us, if I was going to let her walk away, or if I was going to keep fighting. But I also knew that I couldn't just demand forgiveness from her. It wasn't that simple. I had betrayed her too, just in a different way. Moments, small ones, where she'd let her guard down just enough for me to feel like maybe, just maybe we could make this work. But every time I thought we were taking a step forward, something would happen. A look, a word, a moment of doubt that would make her pull away again. And I could feel her slipping farther and farther out of reach. I wasn't the only one feeling the strain. Livia too was torn between her anger and her love for me. The emotional burden was wearing on both of us, and I could see it in the way she avoided the things that used to matter to her. The joy in her eyes had dimmed. She wasn't the woman I married anymore, and I wasn't the man she had trusted. The hardest part was realizing that even though we had uncovered the truth, the damage had already been done. Trust wasn't something you could just rebuild with a few apologies or a couple of heartfelt promises. It took time. Time we didn't have, or at least time that felt like it was running out. In the weeks that followed, we talked, briefly. We tried to rebuild some sort of connection, but every conversation felt like a battlefield. Olivia would ask questions, and I would try to answer them as honestly as I could, but it was always the same pain, the same doubt. She'd look at me like she was waiting for something, waiting for me to do or say something that would make everything okay. But I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to undo the past. The hardest part wasn't the lies. It wasn't even Clara's betrayal. It was the slow realization that maybe, just maybe, our love wasn't enough to overcome the hurt. I could apologize 1,000 times, but the truth was, we were both broken in different ways. And sometimes, broken things couldn't be fixed. I never wanted it to end this way. I never wanted to lose Livia, but in some twisted way, Clara had won. She had turned our world upside down, and now all I could do was watch as everything unraveled before my eyes. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had, but what I do know is this. Sometimes the truth comes too late. Sometimes the damage is done long before the lies are exposed. And sometimes, even when you think you've won, it's already too late to save the one person who mattered the most. We stood there, both of us broken, with the pieces of our marriage scattered at our feet. I had no idea what would happen next. Could we rebuild? Or was it already too late? The silence in the room was suffocating, each breath feeling like it took more effort than the last. Livia and I stood in the living room, the weight of our unspoken words hanging between us, a chasm so wide it seemed impossible to cross. Our eyes met for a brief moment, but neither of us had the strength to say anything. One was there left to say. The truth had come out, the lies had been exposed, but in some cruel twist, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a slow death. "I never thought we'd be here," Livia whispered, her voice cracking as she spoke. "I never thought I'd be standing in this place looking at you like this." I wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, to beg for forgiveness, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She had already made her decision, and I had no right to ask her to undo the pain that I had caused. The tears in her eyes were like daggers, each drop a reminder of how much I had failed her. Every day, for years, we had built a life together. I had promised her loyalty, honesty, love, and now none of it seemed to matter. Not when it was all built on a foundation of lies. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Gideon," Livia continued, the words like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. "I don't know if I can look at you and believe in us again. You kept things from me. You let her control everything. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know if I even recognize you." The weight of her words was unbearable. She wasn't just angry at me for the lies. She was angry at the person I had become, the man who allowed Clara's poison to seep into our marriage, the man who didn't fight for her sooner. I tried to speak, but the words felt heavy in my mouth, as if every apology I had ever said had already been swallowed by the silence that now filled the space between us. "I can't do this, Gideon," she repeated, her voice quieter now, filled with a resignation that I could feel deep in my bones. "Maybe I've always known, but I've been too afraid to admit it. We're not the same people anymore. And maybe it's time to let go." "Livia, please," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "We've been through so much together. Don't let Clara win. Don't let her tear us apart when..." "When what, Gideon?" she interrupted, her frustration and sadness pouring out. "When what? When you should have trusted me? When you should have been honest? I don't know how to move forward with you after everything. After everything she's done, and after everything you allowed to happen." I felt helpless. The guilt, the regret, it was consuming me. I wanted to fix it, to take everything back. I wanted to go back to the time before Clara had ever set foot in our lives, before her whispers and lies had poisoned our world. But I couldn't. Livia turned away from me, her back to me now, as if closing off the very last part of our connection. My heart shattered with every step she took. "I don't know what to do with us anymore," she said quietly, her voice distant, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "I don't know if I can find my way back to you." The pain in her voice made my chest tighten. It was unbearable to think that this was how we were ending, this beautiful, flawed thing we had built. She didn't trust me anymore, and what hurt even more was that I had no right to ask her to. The damage was done, and no amount of crying or apologizing would make it disappear. The finality of it all was like a slow, suffocating burn. The house that had once been filled with laughter, love, and plans for the future was now a hollow shell. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, felt like a cruel reminder of what we had lost. Livia hadn't left yet. She hadn't packed her things or made any firm decisions, but I could feel her slipping further away with each passing second. The distance between us felt insurmountable. She was already gone, emotionally, and I didn't know how to bring her back. "I need some time, Gideon," Livia said softly, turning to face me one last time. "I need to figure out what's best for me. I can't do this right now. I need space." I nodded, knowing there was nothing more I could say. The decision was out of my hands now. I had already broken her trust, and no amount of pleading or begging could fix it. She needed to figure out what she wanted, and so did I. But deep down, I feared that what we had was already lost. "Oh no!" cried Ben Sheeson, giving his life back to Ben on his energy line. His arms dropped to his sides, and he fell backwards unconscious. As she turned to walk out of the room, I felt like my entire world was collapsing. Was this the end? Was this how our story would end? Or was there still a chance, however slim, for us to find our way back to each other? The door closed behind her with a finality that I couldn't ignore. It was the sound of the last thread of our connection snapping. I stood there, frozen, unsure what to do next. The truth had come out. The lies had been exposed. But what did that mean for us? For me? Was this the end of everything? Or was there still a chance to rebuild what had been destroyed? I couldn't say for sure. All I knew was that I was standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing but uncertainty ahead. And as much as I wanted to reach out and pull Livia back, I knew that only time would tell if we could ever put the pieces of our marriage back together. I didn't know if we'd ever be able to heal. But one thing was clear. We were both broken now, and healing would take more than just the truth. It would take forgiveness. It would take time. And most of all, it would take a courage neither of us had shown yet. End of part 1. To be continued. Thank you for being here, for listening. This story, it's just one piece of the bigger picture. And I'm grateful you've joined me on this journey. Remember, if you've been in a similar situation, don't be afraid to share your story. Sometimes the act of speaking out is the first step towards healing. So again, name what of the Diana Abbey stories in your mind. Could you forgive? Could you trust again? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.